I remember that night as clearly as the sound of my own heartbeat, our anniversary, the date I used to circle on every calendar, the day that once symbolized promises whispered under candlelight and dreams built side by side. I spent the entire morning choosing the perfect dress. A soft gold one, he once said, made my skin glow like sunlight. I wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, he'd remember what that day meant to us, that he'd still see me. When I arrived at the ballroom, everything shimmered with wealth and deception. Cameras flashed, violins played, and his name echoed through the air like a brand the world worshipped. He stood at the center of it all, tall, confident, untouchable. My husband, the billionaire everyone envied, and beside him was her, the woman everyone whispered about but no one dared to name aloud. She laughed too loudly, leaned too close, and wore a dress I recognized, because I had bought it last year for myself. I told myself to breathe, to stay composed. I'd learned long ago that in rooms like this, power belonged to whoever controlled their silence. But when he raised his glass and said, "To the woman who inspires me every day," and turned toward her, something inside me cracked. The crowd gasped and then applauded as if betrayal were a kind of art. He smiled at her like I was invisible, like I hadn't built his empire beside him. I didn't cry, not then. Instead, I smiled, a small, tight, deliberate smile. I clapped with everyone else, my palms stinging from the lie I joined in. Every clap was a goodbye to the woman who once believed his love was real. Inside, I buried her, quietly and without a sound. That night wasn't an anniversary. It was a funeral. Not for a marriage, but for the version of me that thought loyalty was enough. I watched him slip his arm around her waist, whispering something that made her laugh, and I realized something powerful. He might have taken my name off his lips, but not out of the world he built with my strength. And that's when I decided if he could toast to betrayal, I'd learn to toast to my rebirth. After that anniversary night, I stopped sleeping. The silence in our mansion was louder than any argument we'd ever had. Every corner of that house felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by memories of laughter that no longer belonged to us. I'd walk past the grand piano he once played for me and find lipstick stains on the glass beside it. Her shade, not mine. The same woman he toasted to under crystal chandeliers was now living in the spaces I built, mocking me with her presence even when she wasn't there. People started treating me differently. The same socialites who once begged to sit beside me at galas now avoided my gaze, whispering behind their diamonded hands. They called me the wife who couldn't keep her man. Every word found a way to pierce through, but I never gave them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I smiled, nodded politely, and left them wondering how I could stand so still while drowning. The mistress made sure her victory stayed public. She wore my jewelry, used my driver, even posted photos from my favorite restaurant, sitting in the same seat I used to occupy. Once, at a charity luncheon, she leaned close and said sweetly, "You look tired. You should rest. It must be exhausting pretending not to care." I looked at her and smiled, not because I agreed, but because in that moment, I realized she mistook my silence for surrender. That was her first mistake. That night, I went home and stood in front of the mirror for what felt like hours. I studied the woman staring back at me, her eyes tired, but not defeated, her heart cracked, but not empty. For the first time in months, I saw myself, not as his wife, not as her rival, but as me, the woman who'd built this life with patience, grace, and intelligence. And right there, I made myself a quiet promise. I wouldn't fight them with anger. I'd fight with truth. I began collecting everything: documents, emails, bank transfers, every piece of proof he thought I'd never find. They were busy mocking me in public, but I was busy preparing their downfall in silence. Because I learned something powerful that night. The loudest revenge is the one planned in quiet rooms. The turning point came quietly, like a change in the weather. No thunder, no storm, just a shift in the air that told me my time was coming. While the world gossiped about my humiliation, I started building my resurrection. I stopped reacting and started observing. Every meeting, every transaction, every whisper that slipped through the cracks of his empire. I caught them all. You see, When you stop begging to be understood, you start hearing everything they thought you'd never notice. I began visiting my father's old lawyer, the one who handled my family's estate before I ever met my husband. I told him I wanted to review the trust documents. His brows lifted, just slightly, but he didn't ask why. When I sat across from him, flipping through those papers, I felt something awaken, a quiet, patient fire. Buried between the lines, I found what I was looking for: my name, my ownership, the proof that the shares my husband claimed as his had been transferred illegally. My heart didn't race, it steadied. I wasn't the powerless wife they pitied. I was the woman with the key to his undoing. Days turned into weeks. I pretended to be the same fragile soul he left behind. I smiled when people pitied me. I nodded when the mistress bragged, and I even congratulated him on his successes. But behind closed doors, I was learning the shape of his lies. My lawyer began drafting quiet letters, subtle, strategic, deadly. Every move was deliberate, every document sealed in silence. I wasn't just collecting evidence, I was reclaiming my power one signature at a time. The nights that once swallowed me in grief now became my sanctuary. I'd sit by the window with my journal, listing everything I'd lost and everything I was about to regain. I didn't pray for his downfall anymore. I prayed for clarity, and I found it in my own strength. When I looked in the mirror now, I no longer saw a woman ruined by betrayal. I saw a woman reborn by it. My silence was no longer pain, it was preparation. And as I closed the last folder of evidence, I whispered to myself, he doesn't even know it yet, but the game has already changed. The night of the gala felt like deja vu, a repeat of every polished lie he'd ever told wrapped in glitter and champagne. The invitations had gone out weeks before, boasting the words, "A night of legacy and love?" I almost laughed when I read them. Legacy and love? He'd destroyed both, yet here he was, parading them like trophies. I arrived late on purpose. Let them whisper. Let them think I was too heartbroken to face him. They had no idea that heartbreak was the least of my weapons. The ballroom glowed under golden lights, filled with faces that once adored us as a couple. He stood center stage, sharp suit, that same smug smile, and beside him, her, the mistress in a crimson gown that screamed for attention. She looked at me like victory itself, and I met her gaze with calm amusement. Because unlike her, I didn't need to perform to be seen. My presence was enough to make the air shift. When the speeches began, he took the microphone with confidence that made my stomach tighten, not from pain, but anticipation. He thanked his investors, his staff, and finally her. To the woman who helped me find inspiration again, he said, raising his glass toward her. The audience gasped before bursting into applause. I could almost hear their thoughts. Poor wife. What a humiliation. But I didn't flinch. I stood and lifted my own glass. If I may, I said, my voice calm but sharp enough to slice through the applause. The room fell silent. He froze, still holding his champagne. I'd like to make a toast, too, I continued. My hands didn't tremble. My heart didn't race. To inspiration, yes, but also to ownership, honesty, and the truth that always finds its way back home. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a single envelope. While you've been busy celebrating your new legacy, I said, I've been restoring the one you tried to steal. As of this morning, the company no longer belongs to you. Gasps echoed through the hall. The mistress's smile vanished. My husband's face drained of color, and I raised my glass once more. To the end of lies, I said softly, and to the woman who built an empire out of betrayal. Then I drank, slow, unbothered, unbroken, as the empire he stole began to crumble right in front of him. For a long moment after my announcement, the ballroom stood frozen, like the chandeliers themselves were holding their breath. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, wide with disbelief. My husband blinked as if trying to convince himself this was some kind of joke. The mistress clutched his arm, her smile trembling at the edges. You're bluffing, he hissed, barely moving his lips. I looked at him, calm and unshaken. Then call your lawyer, I whispered. He'll confirm it. And he did. Right there, in front of everyone, he fumbled for his phone, his fingers shaking as he dialed. I watched him listen, his face slowly draining of color as the truth hit him like a slap. I could almost feel the shift in the room. The same people who once mocked me now watching me with quiet awe. I didn't need revenge to feel powerful. The truth was enough. The reporters at the back of the room began to murmur, cameras flashing, capturing every flicker of humiliation across his once proud face. You forged my signature. You hid assets in her name, I continued, turning toward the mistress. And you forgot that when you try to erase the woman who built your kingdom, she remembers where every brick was laid. The mistress tried to speak, but the crowd's whispers drowned her out. My husband reached out toward me, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps desperation, but I stepped back. Don't, I said softly. You've already touched enough that didn't belong to you. His hand hung there, suspended between regret and defeat. I turned toward the audience, lifting my glass once more. To love, I said, my voice steady. To the kind that teaches you more in its ending than it ever did in its beginning. To betrayal, for reminding me that silence isn't weakness. It's strategy. Applause began slowly, uncertainly, but then it spread like fire. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. The sound of their clapping wasn't validation. It was closure. My husband stood there, stripped of everything but shame. And as I placed my glass on the nearest table, I felt the weight of every wound lift. The toast was over. The truth had been served, and it was intoxicating. After that night, the world changed. Not suddenly, but completely. News channels played his downfall like a symphony of karma. Every secret deal, every forged document, every lie, all exposed. His empire crumbled faster than I could have imagined. The same people who once bowed to him now refused to take his calls. And the mistress who once wore my jewelry, she disappeared the moment the money did. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I just walked away, quietly, gracefully, as if I'd been waiting for this exit all along. I moved into my late father's home, a place that smelled of peace and second chances. The first night I slept there, I left the windows open and listened to the wind. It didn't sound like loneliness. It sounded like freedom. He tried to reach me, of course. Messages, flowers, apologies that arrived too late. I read none of them. I didn't need closure from the man who taught me how to find it within myself. For the first time in years, I woke up not to betrayal or noise, but to stillness, the kind that feels like rebirth. And in that stillness, I smiled. I was finally free. This morning, I stood in front of the mirror, the same one I used to avoid when I felt small, forgotten, and unloved. But this time, I didn't see the woman he broke. I saw the woman I rebuilt. My reflection didn't ask for approval, it radiated peace, the kind that comes when you no longer chase closure, you become it. I picked up the same glass I'd raised that night, not out of bitterness, but gratitude. To the lessons disguised as heartbreak, I whispered. To the silence that saved me. And to every woman who's ever been laughed at before she rose. I used to think power meant being loved loudly. Now I know it's about standing alone without fear. The mirror doesn't lie. It shows who we truly are when the world stops clapping. So if you're listening to this, remember, your worth isn't defined by who leaves the table. It's defined by how you rise after they're gone. Don't fight for a seat in their story. Build your own. Because one day, the same people who doubted your strength will be forced to toast to it. And that will be your truest victory.